The Supreme Court just dropped the hammer on Donald Trump, and honestly, this is kind of breathtaking. I've never seen the justices behave like this before. Welcome back to Occupy Democrats. I'm David Reddish. Since Donald Trump's return to Washington, he and his administration have proven they don't like following the law. I mean, this is a guy who sparked an armed insurrection and is a convicted rapist and felon, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised? In any case, the Trump administration has shown disregard for court orders, such as the Supreme Court ruling to rescue U.S. resident Kilmar Albrego Garcia from an El Salvador concentration camp. The administration's latest issue, however, is birthright citizenship, granted to all people born on American soil as outlined in the 14th Amendment. At the moment... Okay, well here, we'll let Spectrum Nazi Stephen Miller explain.
Birthright citizenship is the biggest, costliest scam in financial history. An illegal alien can come here 9 months pregnant, or on a tourist visa, 9 months pregnant, have a baby. That baby is then declared an automatic citizen, which then entitles the entire family to come here and live here, and every one of them can get welfare. Yes, they can get unlimited welfare, applying as the custodian of this citizen, so-called child. The biggest financial ripoff of Americans in history, not to mention the fact that it is the #1 magnet for illegal immigration and invasion, and that is used by foreign governments to conduct espionage against the United States. Because now, see, we can keep out a foreign spy who has a visa, who's trying to get permission to board an airplane. But what happens when a foreign government uses this ridiculous birthright scam in order to create automatic citizens who then grow up as assets of a foreign government? So it's a major national security threat. The 14th Amendment, the provisions in question were ratified for the children of freed slaves. You can go read the minutes of the debate. They were talking about the children of freed slaves after the Civil War.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right.
The idea that this was meant to provide illegal alien children with automatic citizenship. Do you really think that in the 19th century, 3/4 of states all got together to pass an amendment to say that people that Congress has forbidden from entering here can have automatic children citizens? I mean, the idea is so far beyond even the outer limits of imagination. No human being who suggests it should be taken seriously.
So, first of all, when a propaganda network like Newsmax actually hammers questions against the Republicans, you know there's a problem. And Miller is also being disingenuous here. The idea that a foreign government would create a spy as a fetus is absurd. This is all about racism. So wait until you hear how the Supremes hammer Miller and Trump. But first, we need to discuss the bigger issue. The Trump administration is currently refusing court orders to honor the 14th Amendment. Miller and Trump want to reinterpret it to deny children of foreigners born in the U.S. citizenship, deeming them instead illegal aliens. Trump issued an executive order denying that provision of the Constitution, and now the administration is asking the Supreme Court to ban nationwide injunctions, not just in this case, but in all court cases. Essentially, that would mean chaos in the nation's courts, as some cases move forward in some states and others do not. The justices also asked some pointed questions about the administration's recent targeting of judges as political enemies and its convenient disregard for decisions it doesn't like. So let's take a listen. Now, these are some highlights from the entire arguments, but they run several minutes. You won't be sorry. Supreme Court justices rarely show this kind of fury.
It sort of depends on the government's own actions in a case like this one, where one can expect that there is not going to be a great deal of disagreement among the lower courts. I mean, let's assume that you lose in the lower courts pretty uniformly, as you have been losing on this issue, and that you never take this question to us. I mean, I noticed that you didn't take the substantive question to us. You only took the nationwide injunction question to us. I mean, why would you take the substantive question to us? you're losing a bunch of cases, this guy over here, this woman over here, they'll have to be treated as citizens, but nobody else will. Why would you ever take this case to us?
Well, in this particular case, we have deliberately not presented the merits to this court on the question of the scope of remedies, because, of course, that makes it a clean vehicle where the court doesn't have to look at the past.
You're ignoring the import of my question. I'm suggesting that in a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal, they're winning, it's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. So you just keep on losing in the lower courts, and what's supposed to happen to prevent that?
Again, I respectfully disagree with that forecast of the merits, but in response to the question, what I would say is we have an adversarial system, and if the government is not, for example, not respecting circuit precedent on the court's hypothetical in the Second Circuit, someone injured in the Second Circuit could take the case up, and they could say, look, the government is violating circuit precedent on the hypothetical multiple circuits.
That's the case we're going to take? Somebody who says, after we've said that this all has to be done one by one, then we're going to take a case from somebody who objects to proceeding one by one? How about you're not willing to commit to abiding by the Second Circuit's precedent suppose that there's a single person who brings a suit, and it gets all the way up to us after 3 or 4 or 5 years. And we say, we really do agree with those 4 precedents that Justice Sotomayor started with, and your EO is illegal. Is that only going to bind the one guy who brought this suit?
No, that would be a nationwide precedent that the government would respect.
So finally, once it gets to us after 4 years, you're going to respect that?
Yes, and in addition, we may well respect circuit-wide precedent. The Second Circuit, it just is.
And for 4 years, there are going to be like an untold number of people who, according to all the law that this court has ever made, ought to be citizens who are not being treated as such.
Opinions and judgments here. Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say, in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion?
Our general practice is to respect those precedents, but there are circumstances when it is not a categorical practice. It is, and that is not
this administration's practice or the longstanding practice of the federal government. And I'm not talking about in the Fourth Circuit, are you going to respect a Second Circuit? I'm talking about within the Second Circuit. And can you say, is that this administration's practice or a longstanding one?
As I understand it, longstanding policy of the Department of Justice. Yes, that we generally, as it was phrased to me, generally respect circuit precedent, but not necessarily in every case. And some examples might be a situation where we're litigating to try and get that circuit precedent overruled and so forth.
Well, okay, so I'm not talking about a situation in which, the Second Circuit has a case from 1955 and you think it's time for it to be challenged. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in this kind of situation. I'm talking about this week, the Second Circuit holds that the executive order is unconstitutional, and then what do you do the next day or the next week?
Generally, we follow those.
So you're still saying generally?
Yes.
And you still think that it's generally the policy, longstanding policy of the federal government to take that approach?
That is my understanding.
Okay, so, but it sounds to me like you accept a Cooper versus Aaron kind of situation for the Supreme Court, but not for, say, the Second Circuit. Like where you would respect the opinions and the judgments of the Supreme Court, and you're saying you would respect the judgment, but not necessarily the opinion of a lower court.
And again, I think in the vast majority of instances, our practice has been to respect the opinion as well, in the circuits as well, but my understanding is that has not been a categorical practice in the way respect for the precedents and the judgments of the Supreme Court has been.
So you're not hedging at all with respect to the precedent of this court?
That is correct. I believe the quotation from our application directly addresses that, and we stand by that completely.
Okay.
First of all, don't blame the judges for sounding cranky. Trump has targeted authority they've held since, the dawn of the Republic. What's really at stake here, and the reason even Trump appointed judges like Barrett seem miffed, is that the Trump administration, led by that pinhead Stephen Miller, wants to usurp court authority. Trump wants to decide and interpret the law rather than just how it's enforced. In case you didn't attend 4th grade social studies, and apparently Stephen Miller did not, the legislature makes the laws, the courts interpret them, the executive enforces them. and the court has a vested interest in making sure they are uniformly followed in every state, district, and county. In other words, the Trump administration is on very shaky ground right now. It probably wasn't wise for Trump to target the judges the way he has, as political operatives and his personal enemies. Regardless of how Trump behaves, he does still need to bow to the orders of the Supremes. And if they want to, they can make his life very difficult. At the risk of sounding petty, I hope they do. The past 100-some days have been miserable for this country. Masked operatives kidnapping unarmed people and hauling them off to foreign countries without even arresting them or any other kind of due process. Wrecking our economy with tariffs. Insider trading. Withholding congressionally appropriated funds from agencies or universities that Trump deems his enemies. The list goes on, of course. For those of us that care about the American system, no matter how flawed, let's all hope and pray the justices put a stop to this now. Keep nationwide injunctions intact and allow birthright citizenship. We can discuss the finer points of that in an upcoming segment, so stay tuned. This is Occupy Democrat.